My name is Rahina Rasby, and I'm very honored and excited to be the moderator for this session because Vila McHenry, the speaker, also happens to be a very good friend of mine. And so let me tell you a little bit about her. So Vila McHenry got a BA in computer science from Harvard and a master's in Arab studies from Georgetown. Her work experience included teaching in a private middle school in Egypt, and she has homeschooled her own 3 children for the past 10 years. During that time, she has been involved in a wide variety of academic and social organizations for homeschooled kids, ranging from nature-centric park days to math circles to Model United Nations clubs. In her talk this morning, Vila will be sharing tips on how to educate our children in a non-school setting and how to survive the process with your sanity and family relationships intact. So while she's speaking, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. And then when she's done, she'll have time to answer them. So without further ado, I welcome Vila.
Welcome everybody. Thanks for coming to join. The way I'm going to do this is I have a quick presentation I think might be helpful for everyone to give an overview of this whole educating at home situation, which I know is a new experience for most people listening. And then I'll keep that short and then we'll go right to a question and answer. So anytime you have questions while I'm giving the presentation, go ahead and put them in the chat. Rahina will be watching them and collating them and grouping them into similar topics to keep the Q&A process efficient at the end of the talk. So anytime something crosses your mind, go ahead and put in the chat and we'll get to all of those at the end, inshallah. Okay, so I'm going to start sharing a presentation. These slides, I will make the link available to everyone afterwards, so don't feel obliged to frantically copy things down or anything. I'll make the whole presentation available afterwards, inshallah. So here we go. Okay. Hopefully everyone should be able to see a presentation at this point. Yeah, let me know if it's a problem, but so far that should be working. Okay, so first of all, surviving and thriving while educating at home. So clearly everyone has survived up until this point. I know it's not easy. It's especially for homeschoolers who have chosen this way of life, it's tricky. But for school families who never even expected to have to deal with it, it can be definitely challenging. But I'm hoping that you can not just get through this somehow, but also enjoy it and get a lot of benefit out of it. So I'll be hoping to give you tips on both of those points during this presentation. So first of all, it seems like there's basically 2 different variations people are experiencing. Some school systems have gone all online. Your kids have to be on school face-to-face with a teacher for several hours each day. Multiple siblings need different devices at different times. That causes one set of stresses. The other variety is schools which aren't doing a lot of online work. Instead, they're giving you homework packets, or you have to log in and do a certain number of reading minutes or a certain number of math problems on online services, but not with direct interaction with the teacher. And that can cause a whole different set of issues. So we will be getting there are some things which are in common for everyone, and there are some specific to those 2 situations. So we will get to both of them, inshallah, whichever one you're dealing with. So to break it down into how I look at this, educating kids at home isn't just about the school. This is something which homeschoolers know and live with in general, but which for school families, it's probably come as a bit of a surprise. You can break it down, in my opinion, into 3 areas. First of all, there's the actual education, what you're learning, the content, how the kids are absorbing it, all that actual learning component. But that's not the only part, because you can't separate that from the logistics, as I'm sure you figured out. Figuring out who gets to use which device at which time, figuring out who makes the snacks, because in school they have a separate person for teaching and making snacks. When you're at home, it's all you. You do snacks, you do the house cleaning, you do the teaching. Coordinating with multiple kids who need your help at the same time. Maybe the little one can't figure out how to log on and the older one doesn't understand the math. So you have multiple people needing your attention all of the time for multiple different things. And the last aspect of things is issues that arise from the whole family being at home all of the time. Probably also with the husband thrown into the mix who's not usually around. So you don't get that nice 6-hour peaceful window in the middle of the day when you can just enjoy a cup of tea and gather your inner strength to start it all over again when the kids come home from school. You've got everybody all of the time and you listen to all of the sibling fights. and juggle those dynamics that never seem to stop when everyone's cooped up together. So educating your kids successfully has to deal with all three of those. Having the most amazing curriculum and then no plan for the other two aspects is not going to end up in a good education. So I have tips for all of them, and I hope it'll be helpful, inshallah. So in this presentation, we're going to talk about things that apply to homeschooling in general, or educating your kids at home in general. Then quickly, I'll go through some quick tips for each of those three areas: the actual content, the logistics, and family dynamics that get involved. But I won't go into too much depth because I know people have lots of kids of different ages. So I won't go into too much depth in any of those. And if you have specific questions related to your kid's age, put them in the chat and we'll get to them later. And just to make it clear, although I am a homeschooler, this is not a presentation about homeschooling. This is about how you can cope between now and when you get to put your kids back in school. I'm assuming that for most of the people listening, you're not planning on doing this for the rest of your life. That's a whole separate topic. So this presentation is on the assumption that you're going to do this for as long as you have to, and that then you're going to go back to putting your kids in school. Okay, so first of all, 3 big ideas that apply to educating your kids at home, regardless of their ages and regardless of whether it's virtual school or independent schooling. First of all, don't panic. It probably feels, everyone expected the first couple of weeks to feel like a scramble while things were being figured out. I wouldn't be surprised if after a month of doing this, people expect things to have calmed down a little bit, to have gotten to a routine, and you might be feeling like, how come this is not any less crazy than it was at the beginning, and wondering how much longer you can put up with the mayhem. So first of all, don't panic. Every single family which takes the kids out of school and decides to put them at home, even if they have chosen to do so and they're excited about it, it always takes a long time to find the rhythm. And even after you found your rhythm, things change. All of a sudden, the weather's different and you can't go outside. All of a sudden, you have to look after someone who gets sick and you don't have as much time to focus on math. The rhythm always changes. So don't feel like this sense of being off kilter means you're doing it wrong. And don't think that because you don't seem to have a system going yet, it means your kids aren't learning. This sense of not quite being on top of everything is how it is when you're educating your kids at home. It's not necessarily comfortable, but it doesn't mean anything's going wrong. It doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong, and it doesn't mean your kids are not learning. So don't panic. Seek for the balance, but expect to have to keep adapting. That's how it is when you have kids learning at home. Second thing, educating at home has to work for the whole family. Your house has to still feel like a home, or this won't be sustainable in the long run. You can do it for a couple of weeks, you can do it for a month, but you can't keep going forever with your house feeling like a boot camp for the kids, or you can't go on forever with the mom feeling like she's educating on call as a teacher 24/7 her entire life. You can do it for a couple of weeks, but it's not sustainable for months. And this might take months, who knows? Who knows if things will be back to normal by fall. But you have to set it up so that your house still feels like a home. The mom has to be sane, the kids have to be sane, and you have to structure it so that regular household routines don't get completely disrupted. Like laundry still has to happen, dinner still has to be served. So you have to look for an approach which isn't just focused on my kid needs to learn. You have to look for an approach which means the whole family can thrive with homeschooling, which is possible. But don't be a martyr because it's not sustainable in the long run. Third thing is something which I think maybe some school families might not have seen, but this period can be an amazing opportunity for your kids in their education. I know it feels like what's happened is things have been subtracted. They don't have their art class anymore. They don't have their soccer class anymore. They don't have the teacher available to explain a tricky science problem anymore. But there are some advantages to this whole more peaceful lifestyle that we're doing. First of all, quite often you're aware of an area that your kid needs a bit of help with, but you don't quite have time to slow down and fix it. For example, your kid's in 4th grade, multiplication tables was supposed to happen last year. Your kid pretty much got it, pretty much knows those tables, but you know they could actually use some more practice. But when is there time? There's never time. And even if you were to outsource it and go to tutoring or something, that's more driving, that's more money. You have the opportunity now to think overall where your kid's education is at, where you'd like it to be, and if there are any things you'd like to work on, any things your kid could benefit from some more time spent covering, you can do that now without paying anybody, without driving anywhere, without your kid feeling like he's getting behind the rest of the class. So that's an opportunity that doesn't come up very often. So think about what your kids' educational needs are and see if this could be a chance to really get a hang of that spelling list he couldn't figure out, to do some extra reading practice that is at the level that's comfortable for him rather than at the level that the class is going for, whether that's higher or lower. Things like that. It can be an opportunity. Secondly, if your kids are in school, you don't really get to choose what they learn. The kids are doing this in social studies, the kids are doing this in history, the kids are covering this in science. And the idea of what you want your kids to know, and what you think it's important for your kids to learn about, it's probably not something you've spent much time thinking about. Maybe you've said, oh, I also want Arabic, or I also want Quran. But this is an opportunity for you to think, well, I really want my kid to get more time outside. All of the research says that kids benefit from time outdoors, and my kid is too busy to ever go outside. This is your chance to have some control over the good things you'd like to add to your kids' education without putting too many burdens on your child. There's more free time. You can add to it things that matter to you, whether it's Quran or whether it's exercise or whether it's something the schools don't offer, because that's the third point. Even the best school can't cover everything. It could be that your school does a great job with science, but it doesn't cover computer programming. It could be that your kid's school does a great job with religious education, but they don't teach typing. So this is it could be that your kid really is interested in astronomy, but there's never any time. So this is a time where you can add some of those things which normally would cause more extra stress than they're worth. But now it's an opportunity to fit things in a way that you couldn't when your kids were busy at school all day. So do take the time to think about how this could be an opportunity, because hopefully, inshallah, you won't have too many more opportunities like this, inshallah. So take advantage of it while you have it. In terms of where to start, the first thing I suggest for everyone is don't aim at a timetable. Don't try and come up with a family schedule hour by hour the way kids would have in school, where you've got math from this time to that time and recess from this time to that time. In general, if you try to recreate that in a home setting, it's a gigantic stress creator for everybody involved and doesn't tend to pan out. Everyone ends up feeling that they're running late. Everyone ends up feeling like they failed before they even started because they started the day 10 minutes off schedule. In general, try to come up with a rhythm for your family. So I suggest the first thing you do is think about new opportunities you'd like to incorporate in your new life. Second, make a list of the non-negotiables. So first of all, family routines. Maybe your family always eats together at 6 p.m. Maybe mama's working from home, and so she definitely needs quiet in the house between a certain time period. Maybe the baby always has his afternoon nap from 1 to 3. So those things, family routines that can't be disrupted, fill those in first. Then go through and fill in if your kid's school is sending requirements for they must be online between a certain time and a certain time, add those in for each kid. Then the third thing, and this is important, is figure out what the sanity savers are going to be for the person who's in charge of educating the kids and put those in the schedule too. It's going to be different for everybody. For example, some people cannot function if their kitchen is a mess. That's not me. I can live just fine if my kitchen is a mess. But for some people, if the kitchen is a mess, you just can't focus on something else. For some people, if you don't get enough time chatting with your family over the phone if they're in a different country, you can't focus on staying sane and happy. It could be that you need exercise. It could be that you need a break from the mayhem and the noise and you need 1 hour of quiet time by yourself per day. Whatever it is that you need to stay sane, figure that out and put it in the schedule, because this system working for the long term depends on you staying sane. So you're not taking away from your kids' education by protecting your own sanity. You're adding to it, because education is not going to happen if everyone is losing their minds. So fill those out on a schedule, and that will give you a clear idea of how much free time you actually have. And pretty much guaranteed, no surprise to any of you, I'm sure, that's not going to be as many hours as you need to fit in all of your kids' pre-coronavirus life. So that's an opportunity. It gives you an opportunity to figure out what you really care about, which are the things you care about most. And so moving on to the first topic of the 3 subtopics, we've got the actual content of education. So for this, again, I'm not going to go into a lot of depth because kids are at different ages. I don't want to waste people's time. I'm going to give a quick overview of what in general you should make sure you're covering and what things it's okay to let go of. First of all, this slide is aimed at parents who are doing a lot of virtual schooling, who've got multiple kids who need to be online for morning circle and for online classes with their teachers live, and who are finding it overwhelming. If you're finding it fine, great, you don't need this advice. I've heard from several parents, though, where they have got multiple siblings on the computer simultaneously, and neither one of them can figure out where to put the password, and neither one of them understands what the teacher is saying, and the baby needs his diaper changed at the same time that you're trying to help your 3-year-old with the logging into Zoom. So this slide is addressing that scenario where you've got multiple kids virtual schooling. First of all, find out what's actually required. In most districts, they can't actually require attendance on virtual school the way they can for physical school because of inequity reasons. Not every kid has the technology. So you'll find that although maybe teachers are making a lot of programming available, it may not all be required. It's worth finding out. If you're not overwhelmed, great. If you are overwhelmed, figure out whether you really, really, really must be there for all of it, because chances are, as far as I've heard from all the districts I've learned about so far, it's not actually required in the same way that physical school is required. Second thing, take a look at your kid while they're virtual schooling. See if they look like they're engaged. If your kid is sitting there zoning out, they're not learning anything. Even if the teacher is saying something fascinating and interesting and engaging, and you think your kid should be fascinated, if your kid is sitting there doodling and your kid is sitting there making faces in the camera with his friends, he isn't learning anything, much as you might wish he were. He isn't. And so bending your whole family schedule out of shape so that your kid can sit there and not learn may turn out to not necessarily be the way that ends up with maximum education and sanity for your family. It's worth keeping in mind. It's definitely worth trying to focus on which are the parts of virtual schooling that your kid is benefiting from so that you don't sacrifice those parts for sure. Third, decide what your family thinks is essential. So especially for families who didn't grow up in the US, the American education system, it can be a little bit hard to decipher. It's hard to tell which are the things that you really, really have to care about. Do we care about the history of the ancient Romans? Do we care about the Battle of 1812? The way it goes, especially in elementary school, is kids need to know math. Kids need to know reading. Kids need to have writing practice. The rest, not so much. You progress to the next grade just fine, regardless of whether you know about the Romans. You progress to the next grade just fine, even if you didn't cover the life cycle of the butterfly. The way the American education system is set up, as long as you have reading, math, and writing, you're good to go for the next school year. So whatever your family cares about beyond that is up to you. So think about it. If getting online for that extra social studies course is driving everybody nuts, keep in mind that your kid's education will be fine without it. If your kid is coping fine, awesome. If your family is loving this system, great. If your family is overwhelmed, make sure you cover those 3 core things, and then it is okay to pick and choose. Your kid's education will not suffer. So I'm not saying that social studies isn't important in life, and I'm not saying that science is not important in life. I'm saying that as it's taught in elementary school, not learning the certain facts that they're supposed to learn about how many legs does a spider have is not going to affect your kid's future as a scientist. Then on the other side of the spectrum, there's kids who don't have much virtual school, who just have packets to fill in, or who have to spend a certain number of hours reading online or filling in math problems online. From those parents, I've heard worries, well, how much is enough? It seems like my kid has way too much free time. How can this sort of hour and a half they're doing at home be the equivalent of 6 hours they would have spent at school? Is my kid getting enough education out of this whole system? So again, what your elementary school student needs is reading, math, and writing. If you can tell your kid is making progress in all of those, you don't need to worry about your kid falling behind. This is definitely true. If you want to do more in any of those areas, or you feel that your kid isn't making enough progress in any of those areas, I have some resources here on the slide for you. Need more books to read? I strongly recommend your public library system. They're closed, but there is an ebook system, which all of the libraries in this area have subscribed to. There are 2 apps which you can download on any device. One is called Hoopla, one is called Libby. If you have young kids who need picture books, I recommend Hoopla more strongly. They also have videos and ebooks and various other resources. But in terms of finding books for your kids to read, if you have kids who need picture books, I would download Hoopla. You'll need to input your library barcode number from your actual physical library card, but that's all there is. There's no payment involved. And they have a large number of picture books you can browse through. If you have older kids who need chapter books, I recommend Libby. That works a little differently. You'll have a certain number, you'll have a maximum number of books you can download at one time. And sometimes there's a wait list. Hoopla, you won't find a wait list. Libby, if you're looking for something popular, you will have to wait a couple of weeks for it, but the wait lists move fast. So it's worth filling up your kids' wait list with a bunch of titles, and you'll find them coming in every couple of days. A new book will show up on all of your devices for free, automatically, simultaneously. So that's definitely worth doing, in my opinion. That's the only thing that's keeping us alive at the moment. In terms of what to read, ask your kids' friends' parents. So if your kid really enjoys a book, write it down somewhere. Ask your friends to do the same, and share books. My kid loved this. My kid loves that. It saves you wading through 1,000 different online titles, hoping you pick something your kid likes. Use the resources of kids who have similar tastes to yours. Keep a shared book list somewhere with your friends, and that'll make it easier for everybody to keep their kids supplied with good books to read. If your kid needs more practice with math, you don't feel like getting enough math from their school system, Prodigy Game, there's the free version, there's a paid version. It'll give you tons of practice with math if that helps put your mind at ease about math practice, and kids usually enjoy it. Then if you think your kid needs more practice with writing, that's going to vary a lot with age. I have a billion suggestions for every possible age group, so I won't go into that now. You can ask for your kid's age if you want suggestions. I just suggest in general, family free writing. Pick a time, 10 minutes a day, keep it short. You can do it all together. You do it too. Your 3-year-old, your 5-year-old, your 7-year-old, your 11-year-old, you all sit down for 10 minutes after breakfast, pick a prompt and write about it. We're all talking about what's the most annoying thing about staying home for coronavirus. Where would I go on vacation if I could? Pick a random topic and everybody write about it for 10 straight minutes. Even if you can't think of something to say, sit there and write, I can't think of what to say, I can't think of what to say. Something will get moving and your kid will get writing practice. That's an effective way of making sure that writing's being covered if you feel like it's lacking, but I have lots more ideas if you need them. The last thing I want to say about what you should include in your child's education is include what your child loves to learn. This is something that kids in school don't often get to think about. They're too busy learning what people tell them they have to learn. But it solves two problems from a home education point of view. First of all, if your kid is doing something that they love, they will do it for hours and hours. So you can go make dinner, you can work with the younger kids, you can work with the older kids. Secondly, if a kid is doing something they're interested in, they are learning. Definitely guaranteed they are learning. So it might look something very similar to school. If your kid loves learning about trucks, it'll mean reading a bunch of books about trucks. It might mean driving past the local town's depot where they keep all the diggers. But it might look like a school subject. If what your kid is really interested in is making rainbow loom bracelets or practicing a particular soccer skill, it might not look to you as a school parent that this is education. But what I'd like to highlight for you is that when a kid is trying to figure something out for themselves, they're getting practice in character traits, which are much more correlated with success in life than learning a particular thing about the ancient Greeks, for example, or learning a particular set of Spanish vocabulary words. When a kid sets their own goals, that's a life skill they'll be using forever. Even if right now at age 8, that goal is, I want to learn how to do a header into the net every time. The practice in general of setting a goal for themselves and working to reach it is something they're going to have to do their whole life as grown-ups. Also, kids are going to fail a lot in high goals that they set for themselves. And they're going to be fine with it because they set those goals and they love it. And they're going to keep working through the failure, which is something kids don't get a lot of practice with. For example, I have a daughter who loves crafts. So she makes very elaborate plans that she's going to build a house that's going to have a spiral tower, which is going to have a real light that lights up. And obviously it's harder than she expects. And obviously it doesn't work 1,000 times until finally she gets it right at the end. But all of that practice and problem solving and determination, resilience, not minding when things don't work out, are skills which will pay off for the rest of her life in all kinds of endeavors, not just obviously building little houses out of clay, but in her life in general when she's a grown-up. So if your child is interested in what they're doing, they are learning, I promise you. So if your child is spending hours on Legos, if your child is spending hours, even if it's things that don't look like academic, like learning to do fancy hair braids, they are learning, they're doing research, they're practicing, they're learning to overcome failure and to set their own goals. So if you're feeling like there's too much free time, look for what your child loves and follow that. I have a couple of resources here. If your child's interested in computer programming, it's something that not all schools get to. There's a link right there for where I would recommend you to start. If your kids are interested in engineering, there's Tinker Crates, which is a monthly subscription. There's all kinds of outdoor fort building, there's Legos. If you look on Pinterest, there's 1,000 different STEM challenges that you can do with household materials, all of which are very worthwhile if your kid is interested. Stop motion animation can keep kids busy for hours, and that's both artistic stuff and science stuff together. There's a link for that. Cooking, writing a play with friends, weaving friendship bracelets, hiking in the yard, exploring your neighborhood, learning to type. Those are all there as possible suggestions, but the best one for your family is the one that your kid is interested in, because that's when they're going to learn the most. Middle schoolers and high schoolers. First thing, give them some ownership of a role list. If they have required work from their teacher, obviously that happens first, because grades do matter for these kids. Even though college requirements are being relaxed for kids who will be seniors next year, many schools are no longer going to be asking for SATs and standardized testing due to coronavirus, but grades are still going to matter. So if your kid is getting assigned work, definitely have them do it. Failing that, if they have too much free time in their hands or they're not getting much work from school, ask them what they want to do. Act as if you take it for granted that they have goals and aspirations and projects, and that your role is to help them fulfill them. So this is a good time for driver's ed if their kid's just the right age. See if they can think of a way of earning some money. Ask them if there's a skill they've always wanted to learn. This could be a good time to do it. If they're getting towards the college age, now is a good time to start looking through college brochures and websites and figuring what requirements are, what kind of a school they're interested in for themselves. It'll help them feel connected to the rest of their lives. So I would suggest those if your kids are running out of things to do. If come the fall, virtual schooling is still in place, there is lots of options. Even if you're not satisfied with what's being offered by your school system, there's edX, there's Coursera, there's community college. Those are all options come the fall where your kids can get credit. So don't panic, even if it seems like your kid's high school education is currently on hiatus. Do think if there's a way, if you have parents working from home, see if there's a way your middle schooler or high schooler could get involved. If you're a doctor providing telemedicine, clearly they can't help with that, but maybe they can help with the billing aspect. Maybe they can help with the scheduling aspect. Kids of this age, when they feel like they're helping to run real life, they find it inspiring. And it's nice for them to be able to look behind the curtain of what it's like to be a grown-up for a while. So if there's a way your kid can get involved with your real work, kids of that age tend to find it satisfying, I think. They appreciate the responsibility. And lastly, I suggest you can get a lot of value for a little amount of effort if you plan on doing things as a family. For example, supposing you want your kid to read more good literature. Pick a good high school level book. Decide that mom and dad and the older kids are all going to read one chapter per day. At some point during their day, everyone finds 15 minutes to read that one chapter, and then you can discuss it over dinner. You'll have interesting conversations, and you'll replicate the experience of a classroom a bit in that everyone gets to share different perspectives, and you'll enjoy it more than you think you will. You can use that also, for example, with New York Times editorials, or even more interesting, find an editorial written from a perspective that your family totally disagrees with. Go find something super Republican. Go find something very extreme that's advocating something you totally disagree with. Have everyone read that article at some point over the course of the day and chat about it over dinner. It's really good critical thinking practice for older kids. Plus it keeps them in touch with the real world, which is good. They're almost about to enter it. Same thing you can do with some viewing options. You can look for a good documentary. Last night, PBS NewsHour was great. The segments are about 5 minutes long. So the mom and the dad and the older kids can definitely find 5 minutes at some point to watch an article from last night's news and talk about it at dinner. That covers history, geography, social studies, economics, depending on the topic. It'll all come up naturally without a lot of investment on your part or lots of prior expertise. Okay, that was content. Next up, the actual logistics of how you go about juggling the education of many kids all at home. The biggest complaint I've heard is, how do you educate multiple ages at once? So I won't reiterate what I said before too much, but don't try and do more than is educationally useful. I was speaking with a mom who spent her mornings tied in knots trying to get her 3-year-old and her 5-year-old both engaged in their online Zoom classrooms. My suggestion is that neither of those kids are really benefiting all that much from the online Zoom classroom. And if they snuggled up on the sofa, read some good books and played some math games, it would be far less stressful for everybody, and the kids would learn a lot more. So if you find yourself run ragged with trying to manage multiple age groups, first thing to do is see, are you trying to do more than is actually educationally useful? Failing that, if you think that all of the activities are things you cannot cut or minimize, a strategy that works for most homeschoolers is give the little ones some attention first. If you spend the first 45 minutes, say, reading stories, keeping them occupied, playing Play-Doh with them, you then get a little bit of downtime. They're much more willing to go eat a snack and play by themselves for an hour while you can work with the big kids. In general, in my experience, that works much better than trying to work with the older kids first because their work is more important while being interrupted every 5 minutes by a toddler. So I suggest reversing the order of that. If you need more time with the older kids, delegate, assign an hour a day for each older kid to work with the younger ones. Maybe they're going to do chores together. Maybe they're going to be playing in the yard together. Maybe the big one's going to be teaching the little one. But the main purpose is to keep the little ones out of your hair so you can work with the kid who's not involved in babysitting. It's a necessary survival strategy offered. Older kids, I think they're going to be working independently. But for many kids, this will be more independence than they're used to. They're used to having teachers checking in regularly, especially if they're still in middle school. And they won't have that as much nowadays for every single subject. So I would suggest that you check in with your older kids in the morning. What do you need to accomplish today? And then check in at the end of the day. Have you done? Don't try to micromanage their entire schedule because they're old enough to handle that, but they might need help with the actual keeping track that they're not losing a deadline or forgetting about a project. And the last thing is trying to educate multiple ages all at once is time consuming and logistically complicated, but you don't have to fit all that time into the traditional school day. For example, if you can't fit in a science experiment that you've been hoping to get to, it doesn't have to happen between 9 a.m. and 3 p.m. Monday to Friday. For example, supposing you delegated that to your husband, and he's going to do it with the kids on Sunday morning. That's an option which isn't really available in the school setting, but which works fine for homeschooling. So if you're going crazy, see what you can delegate to your spouse, see how you can spread it out over 7 days rather than trying to do over 5 days. The second common complaint is that with everyone in your house all of the time, the amount of mess is just unbelievable. Everyone is always eating a snack. Everyone is always messing up the kitchen. Everyone is always leaving everything everywhere. You don't have that 6-hour window in the middle of the day when you're the only one at home and you can actually get things all set up again. So that's inevitable. That's going to keep on happening. I think many homeschoolers find the solution is chores. Yes, you could do it faster yourself, probably, for any given task. But the kids have more time than they used to. So the kitchen taking longer to be cleaned isn't necessarily a tragedy the way it would have been pre-coronavirus. Plus the additional amount of housework that there is when everyone is at home all of the time, it's a big jump up usually for most families. And this is going to go on for months and months. If this was a question of cope with extra work for a couple of weeks and then you're back to normal, it wouldn't be such a crucial issue. But this is something that's going to keep on going until coronavirus goes away. So this is an opportunity for your kids to learn some chores. They're often too busy to even notice how many chores are involved in running a house. Now they have the opportunity to learn how to share them, which is good life skills, and it's often a key survival skill for the mom. The last point on the housework is the better the weather gets, the more you can send them out of the house. It doesn't just have to be when you're finished school, go outside. Have them take their school outside. Send them out to the yard with their math book and a blanket and a snack and have them do school outside all morning. It'll give you a chance to clean up and it'll give you some peace and quiet. And it'll mean they're not inside pouring Legos all over the floor. So you can have them hike up a hill and do homework at the top of a hill if they're old enough. You can have them do yard work. You can have them wash your car. Basically, the more you get them out of the house, the less the dishes are going to pile up. So I recommend looking for opportunities on that. Last thing, family dynamics. Everybody's at home, everybody's annoying each other all of the time. So on this one, I don't have brilliant solutions. Sibling fights are sibling fights. The big one is what to do when kids say they don't want to do school. You have an amazing plan, you have a fascinating experiment, or you have something required from the teacher, and your kid is whining. I don't want to do it, I don't want to. It's like homework, but it just never stops. So I think the first thing you should do is take a look at the actual task and see if your kid is right, because they might be. Ask yourself, is this particular task a boring waste of time? It might be. Especially nowadays, teachers are scrambling to find content. They know they have to send something. It could be that your kid is right and that this particular activity is not actually life or death and that they're not going to benefit much from it. In my opinion, you might disagree, but in my opinion, life is too short to spend it fighting with your kids about something that you know is a waste of time and that they know is a waste of time. So I would suggest if a particular task, not schools in general, but if a particular task is worth whining about, don't make them do it. Not their whole education, a specific task. You can end up fighting endlessly over a specific task. Don't feel like you have to win every battle. If your kid is right, this is a waste of time, you can skip that one thing. Second strategy is, can you make it more interesting? Your kid has to read a book they find boring. Can you swap out a different book, similar level, but that your kid is more interested in? Your kid has to write out some reading comprehension questions where the point is to prove that they understood the reading. Okay, maybe they can just tell you the answers to the questions. That proves they understood the reading. And it's much less hassle for the kid if the kid is finding it really challenging. If your kid has a writing assignment they're not inspired by, like for example, write about the view out your window. Tell us about your favorite pet. Maybe they don't care. Substitute something else. Give us instructions on how to beat the hardest level on your favorite video game. Tell us all about why this doll is your favorite as opposed to some other doll. If your kids are interested in the work, they'll resist it less. But if it can't be helped, it's math, it has to happen. That's where a routine comes into play. Just like in school, kids know they have math from this time to that time, and it feels inevitable and they just accept it because that's how life goes. If you can set up a structure so that that subject that they tend to resist happens pretty much around the same time, pretty much every day, and they know that once they've gotten through it, it's done for the day, sort of power of habit can take over a bit and reduce the amount of resistance. But obviously, as with homework, it's probably never going to be completely free of complaints. Sibling squabbles. Well, I don't know. I don't have a brilliant solution for it. But in general, I think that the more time kids spend together with their siblings, the better they tend to get along. And not like homeschool kids never fight, but I do feel like they do tend to be closer. So it could be that your kids are just not used to spending so much time together. Give it some time. They'll probably find out ways of playing together that are more fun than they had expected. I know my kids have found that. And rather than trying to keep them apart, I have found it helpful to try and push them together. If they're fighting a lot, I give them a joint task. Neither of you can watch TV until you have both gone and washed my car. You both need to go together and put on a show for grandma. You both need to go down and sort the laundry together. Pushing them together, in my opinion, tends to work better than trying to force them apart. Your mileage may vary. And the other thing I found important in this is make it clear that in your homeschool, kindness between siblings is the top of the list. There's not always time when you have to rush for school and you have to rush for after school activities. You want to keep your kids to stop fighting and move on with life because you have a schedule to keep. You don't have that anymore. So it can be an opportunity. You can put everything on hold when two kids are fighting. You can say, okay, we're going to stop with everything until you guys figure something out that you both think is a fair solution to this. It's probably going to take forever. You probably could solve it for them in 3 seconds. This is an opportunity for them to learn how to get along themselves, and it usually takes less time than I expect. And if you make it clear that in your family right now, siblings getting along is more important to you than math assignments and reading worksheets, I think you'll find overall it benefits for your family. Last slide. Don't worry about this too much. It's not possible to mess up your kid's future with a couple of months of homeschooling. Even if your kid did nothing this entire time except for stare at the wall, it's only a couple of months. They will be fine. You're not messing up their future. Don't be afraid to experiment. You can't mess this up. Don't be afraid to say today is a wash, nothing is happening. You're not going to mess this up. Kids are very resilient. They can learn a whole bunch of stuff at any point in their lives. You're not going to mess up their futures by homeschooling for these couple of months. And in general, if you're at a point where you've got 3 crying children and you don't know how to make anyone do their math, choose an option that's going to make a happy memory for your family. If that means the heck with math, we're going out for ice cream, I recommend in the moment of crisis, choosing the happy memory, partly because that's what they'll remember when they're older, partly because if everyone is stressed out and crying, they're not going to learn the math. Even if you force them to do the worksheet, it's not going to stick in their brain. And thirdly, homeschooling is hard. This is going to last for a long number of months probably. So be kind to yourself, be kind to your kids. It's the only way to make it last long term. So that's what I have to offer. I hope, whoa, there's a lot of people. I hope some of that was helpful. And feel free to jump in with questions. I guess Rahina's moderating with any or all of what I just said.
Yes, please, everyone. Mashallah, as you can tell from her talk, mashallah, Sister Vila is just a fountain of amazing knowledge and advice. And I know myself, I've learned so much from her. So this is really a great opportunity. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat.
I see a question in the chat about will the slides be available? Yeah, sure. I'll send the link to Brother Imran and I'm sure he'll know how to circulate to everybody. So feel free to any questions along the lines of, can you recommend a specific thing for my kid to learn a specific subject? Or what do you do when kids of a particular age are complaining? And any kind of those routine questions, feel free to jump in. It doesn't have to be about homeschooling in general as a concept.
I mean, I know some things just to say that I can emphasize as a homeschooler myself is what Vila said about learning doesn't necessarily have to happen from your school teacher or from a book or from, whatever homework they've been given. I think it's really important to remember that learning happens all the time, even, in something like a sibling fight. Believe it or not, as miserable as the experience may be, your kids may actually be learning something about getting along and how to solve problems themselves. And so I know in this time and age, it can be hard to find positivity in everything, but I really have learned as a homeschooler that there is learning going on all the time, pretty much in everything, almost everything your child's doing. So like Sister Vila said, try not to get so stressed out about the schoolwork and just remember that your kids are still learning with what they're doing.
If you want to ask a question out loud as opposed to typing in the chat, feel free to use the hand raising icon and then we can unmute you and you can say your question for everybody. A question from Nadia. What do you say if your kids, if you ask kids what they want to do and they say they want to sit on their phone or on Instagram? Screens are tricky, especially when kids are getting so much schoolwork via screens and yet they want more screens, what to do with their free time. My opinion, not everyone will agree, my opinion is if you take the screens away, take the social media away for however many hours a day you feel is best for your family, kids will find something to do. They will whine and whine and whine and whine and say you're the worst person in the world and they have no friends anymore because of you, but then they will go find something to do. So I think for as long as Instagram is an option and for as long as they know that they have social media options as one of their choices for this particular 2-hour period, it's probably going to be their number one for a lot of kids. If you can convince them that you're not kidding and between now and 4 p.m. it's not an option, they will find something to do. You might be surprised as to what it is. It might not look educational to you, and kids who have been in school their whole lives, they might not know, oh yeah, I love making strawberry souffle. Oh, what I really want to do is go outside and watch the stars. It might not cross their mind because they haven't necessarily had a lot of practice in figuring out what they're interested in. But if you leave them with no screen in front of them, they will find something to do. I recommend you at least give it a try. Your kid might not know what they're interested in, but they'll find something. A question from Mariam Mahmoud. How can we balance between allowing kids to join classes on Zoom but still maintain screen time? Yeah, so I know some parents feel that having their kids able to see their school friends via their Zoom classroom is a way of remaining socially connected. It can be. I'm not always really convinced that online virtual school it provides the same kind of social connection that seeing your friends at recess does. The reason I think that is that you might have heard of TECA, which is the online public school system for Massachusetts. 2 of my homeschool students are 7th graders, and they have been in TECA all year in 7th grade. So each one in their separate houses, but they've had classes all day together ever since the beginning of the school year. They hadn't even realized that they were in the same class. They'd been together for math and social studies and Spanish and homeroom for 6 months before I pointed out to them that, you guys are actually in the same virtual class. So I think that getting to see your friend's face on a Zoom screen is not the same as actually getting to hang out with your friend. So if your kid is doing a lot of online Zoom school and still is telling you, but I never get to see my friends, I would believe them that this is true, that they don't feel like they're seeing their friends, even though they've been in a Zoom classroom all day. In my opinion, the less screens, the better. In my opinion, kids' lives are very full of screens already. And although they can be handy for keeping kids quiet, the kids aren't learning an awful lot from them, and they're not learning how to cope. They're not discovering their own interests. They're not discovering how to make plans and pursue them. So I would recommend minimizing the screens. I know it's hard, and I know not many parents feel like they can cope. Give it a try. There'll be a bunch of whining, and then they'll find something to do. Ruhina, do you want to pick a question? I wasn't paying attention to the chat.
Yeah, of course. So Sister Arshia asked, what would you recommend are good motivators for getting their work done? I feel like I have to motivate them with more screen time in order to get them to do their work.
Oh gosh. Okay. Well, as the weather gets better, you can plan things like, all right, you can plan things like, this family is going for a hike around the Blue Hills at 1 p.m. if you're done with your schoolwork. That kind of thing, as kids are desperate to get out of the house. Again, if your kids are really, really strongly resisting a particular thing, I would look at it, see if it's something that they need to do, see how you can minimize it. Do they need to spend 4 hours doing their work? Will 3 hours be just fine? It's easier, I find, to zoom in on the really valuable things than fight all day long about things which are not necessarily as crucial. I don't have magic words that work. I generally choose to not force kids to do things that they absolutely hate beyond a certain minimum number of things, which we just get done as a matter of course as soon after breakfast as possible. Sorry, I don't have a magic wand on that one.
Okay, and then Hamida's asking, is there any Islamic website or YouTube for ages 3 to 4 for them to do some kind of Islamic activities or learning?
No idea. I don't let my 3 and 4-year-olds go very much on online websites. So what a little kid is going to be learning on a website is stories of the prophets, maybe some dua, maybe some hadith, all of which is valuable, but life, I think, is for a little kid, is how kids are most engaged in learning. If they're helping you doing the dishes, that's learning how to be a good Muslim. If they're learning how to share with a sibling, that's learning how to be a good Muslim. And in my opinion, little kids will absorb that more if you bring that up in conversation frequently as part of their regular life, rather than having Islam be a thing that you learn when you go to the computer and click the cartoon character. I think at that age, they find it hard to make the transition that what they see on the cartoon is supposed to be transitioning into their viewpoint of life in general. So I would suggest for really little kids, try and bring Islam in front of their everyday life in as many ways as you can. But I'm sorry, I'm sure there are websites out there. I don't have a list.
Okay, Sister Hala had raised her hand, so I'm just gonna give her an opportunity. Sister Hala,
Assalamu alaikum, Vila. I was just thanking her for the presentation. Wonderful presentation. Jazakallah alf khair. I loved everything you mentioned. The last part you talked about the 3 to 4 years and how we can the daily life can be actually Islamic things is very touchy. Jazakallah khair for touching this point as well. You've been helping me on the personal level actually with my kids, but I wanted to ask this question. Maybe it's going to benefit others. I talked to you before about like having book club or when we read to the kids and have like open discussion. It was my first time to do it, and then I found that the kids took me out of the book scenario completely, and they started have existential questions and discussion. They were enjoying it. They were very into it, and they were very engaged. But it has nothing to do with the book subject or material. So okay. Like in the middle, I feel, and they were having like a lot of good thoughts, and they brought very good ideas, and they were very engaged together, and I love the discussion. but I didn't know what should I do. Like, should I just go back to the subject, and this is more important so that I can make sure that they understood the details and good grasp about what's going to happen, or the book club should just go, like, with the flow of the kids to discuss.
Okay. So with book clubs for younger kids, having them be excited about literature is awesome. Having them motivated to finish a book because they've got book club this afternoon is awesome. So having them enjoy it is fantastic, and that's definitely the key thing. Having a book club that the kids don't want to come to when they're whining is more problem than solution. So good job on making it an experience that the kids are excited about. That's great. In terms of wanting them to stay focused on a particular topic, there's a couple of ways you can use. If, for example, what you're interested in is making sure reading comprehension has happened, you want to make sure that they're not just rushing through it, that they're actually paying attention to the details. One way you can do it is you can have each kid, as they read the assigned chapters, come up with a trivia question they can share with everyone in the meeting. So that encourages them both to pay attention to the details so they can come up with a tricky question, and also to be paying attention to details in general so they can get the answers to their friends' tricky questions. And then you'll be able to tell, as you just listen, to how many kids got how many answers right in the meeting. The kids will think of it as a trivia game and enjoy it, but you will be able to get a good overview of, okay, so in general, they all missed the fact that this kid's dog died or whatever it was. Or you'll be able to see, oh yeah, okay, so it looks like they mostly all figured out how this grandma was actually the long lost cousin of the other character. Whatever it was, you'll be able to get a picture of overall comprehension of the group. Did they get it? Did they not get it? In a way that's fun for them. Another way you can try and keep kids' attention focused is you can, at some point, either at the beginning or in the middle, you can have one quick reflection question where you take 5 minutes where people aren't chit-chatting. They're writing down thoughts on a particular thing related to the book that you have, a question you've made up in advance. Something that they'll find not a trick question, but something which they'll enjoy thinking about. And then after they've written their notes, have everyone share what they wrote. See who had similar opinions, see who thought different things. Like, for example, a good question for something like that, if you're halfway through a book, is, well, what do you think is going to happen next? Don't share right now. Everyone take a couple of minutes, write down on a piece of paper what you think is going to happen next in this book, and then we'll share ideas. That can help get kids focused on a topic that you want them to be paying some attention to. And it can lead to interesting discussion when people have different opinions on how things are going to go. So it ties the discussion to the book without killing their creativity and interest. But in general, kids being excited and chit-chatting a lot about the meaning of life is a good thing in a book club. And I would recommend that wholeheartedly over a set of boring questions that they all have to answer dutifully in a workbook style.
Okay, any recommendations for books or a website on the Prophet's stories, or I don't know if it's the Prophet Sallallahu or the Prophets, all the Prophets for ages 10 to 13?
I'm not the expert. There are many people who are. Ruhina, you would know, right? What do you think?
There was, unfortunately, I can't remember the name. Remember that series that someone was doing on the Prophet Sallallahu life? Maybe Sister Nadia would know. But unfortunately, I can't remember the name of it. It was an online thing. It was
I'm sorry. No. We should maybe ask the teachers in QLC to put together a suggested library of books they recommend that they could share with the community. That'd be good for everybody.
Okay, and then let's see. We have just a question again about screen time. If they're getting way more screen time than they should due to online schooling, I think it's a risk for kids' future activity as kids are more susceptible to being impacted by the screen time. Do you have any views or thoughts on that? It's not so much a schooling question, more like a
family philosophy approach to screens and media question. I mean, in my family we don't do screens.
Right.
So I can attest that it is possible to not do screens and have happy, healthy kids who are not spending their whole life hating you for your cruelty. It does work fine. For kids who are getting a lot of screen time, it's a big transition and it's going to involve a lot of whining. But it's possible. I personally feel that a bunch of time spent on screens is not the best thing for my kids, either emotionally or physically or developmentally. So I choose not to let them do a lot of screens, or almost any, unless they're, for example, I differentiate between different kinds. One of my kids likes to write books. So she's on the computer a lot, writing stories. I don't count that as screen time. One of my kids was, for example, she was programming a model of coronavirus yesterday, trying to have little balls bouncing around the screen so that they would infect each other, and then she could model the effect of social distancing or not by how close the balls came to each other. So she spent a lot of time on the computer for that, but I didn't count that as screen time. That was awesome. But in terms of chit-chatting on social media, or watching YouTube video after YouTube video after YouTube video, or hours and hours and hours of PBS Kids, I'm not an expert. I personally don't think it's useful for kids developmentally or emotionally. If you put your foot down, the world won't end. That's as much as I can offer. I know it's not an easy topic.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like these times obviously are very unique. So as a parent, I know it's hard not to think about it, but maybe just try not to worry too much about the screen time at the moment, and just try to get your kids, I guess, to take as many breaks as possible if you feel like they're doing school online all day and then they want to be on the screen again. Maybe have a limit that you feel is safe for them to be on. I don't know. Okay, Sister Hala had a question. Let's see. Okay, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I'm going to go back to the reading experience for kids. Do you have, with the book clubs, I'm sorry again, Vila, if I'm
no problem
insisting on this point. So for the kids, did you find that it's better to read as group? Like if you have a group of 5 kids, to have like each one read a paragraph or page and then go and discuss together during the book club meeting? Or you prefer that everyone read on his own, and then when you meet, you discuss and reflect together, or ask comprehension or trivia or whatever?
The way I've always done it is read in advance, and everyone comes having read the assigned part. For the younger the kids, the shorter the chapters. Better to have them read 1 chapter, 2 chapters, maybe 3 chapters if they're short, and then discuss, rather than look at an entire novel and decide which parts they're going to focus on the purpose of discussion. So I would prefer to check in for multiple shorter book clubs, each covering a couple of chapters, which is more similar to what they would do in the school scenario anyway, and then discuss all together. I find that when kids are reading all together as a group, kids who are faster readers tend to jump ahead and are bored having to wait for kids who are having a harder time. Kids who might find reading out loud to be a pressurized situation can find it stressful. So I would recommend having them read a short chunk of chapters before the club and then discussing in the club. But your mileage may vary. Whatever works best for you, whatever the kids are excited about is the way to go. Sister Arshia has a whole bunch of recommendations in the chat if anyone's interested about good books on Sirah and the Sahaba. So I'm definitely going to be copying those for sure, in case anyone else is interested.
Okay, any other questions? Still a lot of wonderful ideas to think about. Okay. Vila, would you like to add anything else, or?
No, I'm well done. Thank you guys for coming. Feel free to contact me anytime if you have specific questions.
Okay, inshallah, jazakallah khairan, mashallah. Everyone really benefited so much from your talk, and just pray everyone stays safe and uses these everything you've learned today, and hope your homes are.
Thank you so much, Vila. Thank you very, very much.
You're welcome.
No,
you're welcome.
ربنا يكرمك. Merci.
Inshallah. Take care, everyone.
Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum.